This is the Winchester 1894, a truly legendary deer hunting rifle. And this model came off the press in 1949, making it over 75 years old at the time of recording. And you might say, wow, that's a pretty old rifle. But I've got another Model 94 with me that is literally old enough to be this one's dad. So this is another Winchester 94 in 30-30 or 30 WCF, whichever you prefer. But this specific rifle came off the press in the year 1915, making it over 110 years old at the time of recording. Now it's got some rust, some bumps, bruises, patina, a little bit of corrosion here and there, but in today's video we're going to take care of all those problems and get this thing back into fighting shape because I got some pretty cool plans for this rifle coming up in the future. Let's get started. So today's plan is to fully disassemble this century-plus old rifle and clean it up. We're going to be cleaning up all the internal parts, but I will not be sanding the varnish off of the wood and refinishing it, and I will not be rebluing the barreled receiver. I don't want to erase all the marks that history has left on this rifle, but I do want to preserve it in its current state so that we can keep all of that character, but time itself won't damage it any more than it already has. This is going to require some pretty basic tooling, so if you have a similar project going on at home, you could follow along with this video to disassemble, refinish, and then reassemble your rifle as well. Then in part 2 of this series, we're going to take this rifle and its younger brother out on a range session to assess accuracy, form, and function. And then in part 3 of this series, we're going to get them back out in the woods for one last hunt. Let's not get too far ahead of ourselves though. Let's head out into the garage and discuss the tooling that we're going to need to get this project done. All right, let's talk about tooling. For our disassembly, first and foremost, we're going to need a punch set and a nylon hammer. You don't want to be using a metal hammer on old school rifles if you don't have to, so we are less likely to mar them up. Second up, we're going to need a bit driver of some sort and an assortment of bits. The really convenient thing about the Winchester 94, at least from the year 1915, is that it's completely assembled out of only flathead screws. So you only need one bit. Just kidding, they're all a different size. Secondly, a little bit of WD-40 just to loosen up any bound up fasteners just from being on the gun for so long. Then some brake clean. We're going to use this on the internal mechanisms once we have it all disassembled. And then for reassembly, a little bit of Hops No. 9 gun grease because that's just proper. Now kind of the star of the show for everything we're going to be doing is some 4/0 steel wool. The theory behind the 4/0 steel wool is that it is super fine. What this means is if you rub this steel wool on a rusted area of the gun, you're going to remove the flaky surface rust that has a weaker bond to that metal without removing the bluing or the patina, which is something that we want to preserve in this case. So this is going to be used in conjunction with some, again, Hops No. 9 gun oil on all of the metal parts to remove any surface rust that we want to get off of there. You can also use this 4/0 steel wool with some boiled linseed oil to help refinish old, dried out wooden components like the stock and the forend. So this is literally all you're going to need, and if your immediate reaction to seeing this is, wow, that's pretty simple, you'd be correct. This is not going to be a very complicated job, although the effects of it are going to be pretty substantial to keep this rifle running for possibly another 110 years. Essentially, the plan for this guy is I'm going to drop the guts out of the receiver, which is these receiver pins and screws you see here. I'm going to remove the front forend so that I can get the magazine tube out, because I'm not sure if you can see it on camera or not, but the space between the barrel and the mag tube is seeing a lot of corrosion. I want to get in there, clean that out, and get it stopped. So that'll be these two barrel bands, front and rear, being removed to get this forend off. And then we're going to take off the stock as well. The good news about the stock is it's pretty simple to remove with those two screws there around the flip up peep sight on the bottom. So, rifle's clear for those of you that want to see that. Step number 1, let's get these receiver pins removed. All right, let's kick this thing off. First and foremost, I am not a gunsmith, so if you're looking for a gunsmith's explanation on how to tear down your Winchester Model 94, this probably ain't the video for you. But I am going to do my best to explain it as we go. What I'm removing here is your breech bolt pin, which is held in by that screw on the outside of the action. Then you can just run a punch through and knock that pin out, no problem. Mine came out pretty easy because this rifle is older than dirt. Then you can make the move down to your lever assembly and remove this screw from that assembly. This is going to allow us to just lift that entire lever assembly out once this screw is removed. But again, this screw does retain a small pin, which again, just take whatever punch you have and press it out of the action. Then you can just lift up on your lever as if you were running the action of the rifle, and the entire assembly will lift up and out. You can take these two pieces apart to further disassemble the rifle, but just from looking at this assembly, I don't feel the need to do so. It's fairly clean at that joint, and I just hit it with a little bit of brake clean later. Now we're going to go ahead and remove our carrier. There are two twin screws that hold in this carrier from either side of the receiver, and they are completely symmetrical, so go ahead and remove both of those. And then you can just lift up your entire carrier assembly out of the receiver itself, and that part is done. Covered a nice equal layer of grime, just like everything else inside this rifle. We're going to go ahead and move back to the stock now and remove the butt plate. It doesn't get much simpler than this, it's just a couple of wood screws holding that plate into the stock itself. And now that we have that off, we can see that beautiful patina on there and a nice little bit of dirt on the inside edges. These two screws gave me a bit of trouble, so I hit them with some WD-40 before I risked stripping them out. Somebody had previously taken this rifle apart or possibly installed this peep sight and nearly stripped one of these screws. So I just decided to take my time, make sure I was using an appropriate bit size, and soak them in WD-40 in order to get this whole assembly off. Now the rear bolt is the only one that actually holds the tang to the stock. So if your model doesn't have this flip up peep sight, you don't even have to take that front screw out. So as you loosen this, you'll pull up this long pin screw, and then once this is out, your stock should come right off. Make sure you take it off nice and gently, not like that. And there we have our removed stock, covered in a little bit of oil right now just from working on it, but we will come back to polishing and re-oiling this very soon. Now we're going to go ahead and take out the trigger assembly screw, and then we're going to go ahead and pull the trigger and deactivating that tang safety, and you can drop out the hammer itself, and just like every other part, a nice layer of grime. Then you can just come in and pull your entire breech bolt backwards and out of the action. Lucky for me, this seems to be in pretty good shape. The firing pin's nice and clean, the bolt face is nice and clean, so I don't have to tear this down into its respective parts in order to clean it. Next step is going to be removing our locking bolt, which you can literally just push straight up out of the action and remove. That's going to need quite a bit of cleaning, but no problem at all. And now we can move up to the magazine tube cap, which is held in position by this little retainer screw. You want to make sure that when you're taking this cap off, you remember it's under a lot of spring tension. Nice job. And just disassemble that with a bit of care so that you don't send that into the stratosphere like I did. And there you have your magazine spring. Now to get the magazine tube off the rifle, we got to take off this front barrel band, which is very simple. Just remove this little barrel band screw, which also serves as a pin. And once that's out, you can go ahead and pull off your barrel band, unless it's stubborn like mine, in which case you can just take a little punch to it and remove it. Super easy. Now this is where we're starting to see a little bit of corrosion on these areas that are pressed up against the steel of the barrel, where moisture can sort of hide and create that red flaky rust that we're trying to avoid. You'll notice that this screw is pretty well mushroomed at this point. I did not do that, believe it or not. The previous owner at some point had tried to take that out and ended up nearly destroying that screw head. So getting that out was a bit of a chore, but once you have that loosened, you can go to the other side and just punch out that pin. And now we can remove our rear barrel band the same way we had to remove the first one, because I think that wood has partially swelled out and created pressure against that barrel band. The magazine tube itself should slip right out of the fore end, like so. And as you can see on this mag tube, we've got that red flaky surface rust that I was talking about earlier, and we've got a matching imprint of rust on the bottom of the barrel as well, and across that little pinhole for the front barrel band. Also back here at the receiver end, where that wood was holding moisture against the steel, we've got some more surface rust to take care of. Alright, we're going to start on steel components first, and I will do the receiver last. So first step, all of these guys are covered in a pretty healthy bit of grime that I want to kind of get off of the rifle itself. Best way to do that, if you ask me, is just hit them with some brake clean and a rag. So that's going to be step one. A little bit of this, a little bit of that, and just take off all that surface nastiness so that I can kind of get to the bottom of what's going on here. So make sure you're in a well-ventilated area and hit them with a little bit of parts cleaner. Now I don't think I need to explain to you how to use brake clean and a rag, so while we wait, we're just going to talk about the history of the Model 94 a little bit. Interestingly enough, the Model 94 was the first rifle in America built to use a smokeless powder cartridge, which is where that 3030 or 30 WCF comes from. But the original rifle was chambered in .32-40, which means a .32 caliber bullet loaded over 40 grains of black powder. Obviously, this rifle was invented in 1894, but the 30WCF didn't come out until 1895, but that cartridge caught on so quickly that it is now basically synonymous with the Winchester Model 94. Now, at some point, they quit marking their barrels with 30WCF and began marking barrels with 3030. Same cartridge, different name. Essentially, other lever gun manufacturers like Marlin didn't want to give Winchester free advertising by having the cartridge on the Marlin rifle labeled Winchester Centerfire, so they started naming it 3030. In my opinion, I think that name just sounds better. Now, as you can see here, we're going to take that extra fine steel wool to the wood furniture and then follow that up with a nice layer of linseed oil. You really can't add too much here, as all the excess is just going to fall off the sides and not soak into the wood. And then we're going to set these aside and let them soak for about 10 minutes once we put on that first coat. I actually went back and added a second coat because that first coat didn't quite penetrate as deeply as I wanted to, and it came out nice and even. But you can see on the steel wool I am removing a bit of dirt and grime and imperfections in the surface of the wood. That's going to let that oil penetrate better and keep the overall surface finish nice and even. And then we're just going to repeat the exact same process for the forend as well. Now, you remember that rust on the barrel that I was talking about earlier? It's very, very easy to take off. Just lay down a small coat of oil and gently scrub with that extra fine steel wool, and all of that soft, flaky, structurally unsound rust is going to come right up and off of the rifle. Now, there's a little bit of rust where this pinhole goes through for that front barrel band. Since it's such a small little crevice that I can't quite get the wool into, I'm going to take a stainless steel brush into this area to remove the rust. Stainless steel is probably a little bit too harsh for this job, but since it's just a small area and it only needs like maybe 10 passes with that brush, I don't really mind. And as you can see, came out squeaky clean, absolutely no rust residue left over after that scrubbing. And then we're just going to repeat that whole process for the rest of the barrel. If there are some problem areas around the gun that the steel wool isn't getting into deep enough, you can definitely use a brass brush to get those bristles down into the little nooks and crannies. And now we're just going to repeat this process again on the patinaed receiver. And you'll see some slight color shift in some areas where the patina was darker. That was becoming a faster form of corrosion that was going to damage the firearm, whereas the patina itself can actually serve as a bit of a barrier between the elements and the receiver itself. Again, I really wanted to preserve this patina because it's a difficult effect to mimic without some chemicals and really doing it on purpose, and I think it's a great look for an old rifle. Now, on the back of the tang here where the Winchester labeling is located, since this was underneath that flip-up peep sight, there was quite a bit of moisture on it at some point and it was rusting fairly heavily, but a quick polish with that steel wool and you can see it brings it right back up to that nice clean steel. And now, guess what? We're going to repeat this process again on the magazine tube. Now, you hear people refer to pre-64 and post-64 Winchester 94s pretty often in the trading and collecting market. The main difference between the pre-64 and post-64 Winchesters was that post-64 Winchester did start to cut a little bit of corners in their rifle manufacturing for the Model 94. Namely, they replaced the billet forged receivers with sintered ones, and they cut corners on smaller parts like using stamped cartridge lifters and things like that. Now, as far as the function of the rifle, this didn't really impact it, but as far as like the beefiness and durability and overall bomb-proof nature of the Winchester 94, it did take away from that slightly. It's for this reason that pre-64 Winchesters command a bit higher of a premium than their post-64 cousins. And in the case of this rifle being from 1915, it is like mega pre-64, meaning that in really good shape, this rifle could command a decent premium on the collector's market. Although I do not plan on trading in, selling, or retiring this rifle anytime soon. This rifle also has some pretty cool advantages over modern hunting rifles. Obviously, you're not going to get the same level of accuracy out of these as you can like a hyper-accurized modern bolt gun, but their trim nature in width makes them really easy to carry through dense forests, brush, briars, things like that, without them getting hung up on a lot of stuff. Also, if I'm carrying a lever action in the woods on a hunt, I don't really plan on carrying it slung. The balance point is right at the middle of the receiver, which makes it really easy to palm and just carry with you, and that also makes it faster to deploy if you jump a deer or whatever game you happen to be hunting. And that's really convenient and kind of gives this old school vibe to the hunt overall, which again, most of why I'm doing this project is just for the old school vibes. And we're going to follow up that trend in the shooting session in the next video, as well as the rifle hunt in West Virginia in November. Now that all the parts are cleaned, we can move into reassembly. So we're going to start with the butt plate. Again, it's just as simple as two little wood screws on the back here. We'll go ahead and replace the front barrel band after reinstalling the magazine tube and forend. as well as that rear barrel band. Got to be careful with that mushroomed out screw. Go ahead and push your magazine spring back into place, remembering that this thing is under quite a bit of tension and you need to be careful not to send the magazine cap into outer space. And gently hold that in place while you replace the cap and add in that little set screw, just like so. And with that, we have the entire front end of the rifle reassembled. Time to move back to the receiver. So go ahead and push in your bolt. Go ahead and replace your block. Reinsert your lower tang, which also houses your trigger. This should take a bit of a beating from the nylon hammer to reseat, but again, since mine's older than dirt, it just slips right in. Go ahead and lay the hammer back into its position. You kind of have to fish it down through the receiver just to get it to sit right. And then you should be able to manipulate the action to get this pinhole to line up. Go ahead and press that through and then tighten it down. Now we can go ahead and reinstall our carrier, again with these little twin hybrid pins / screws on either side. Once you have that tightened down, go ahead and flip your carrier up out of the action, lift up on your breech block, and push back on your bolt. This is the position the rifle needs to be in to reinstall the lever assembly. Now this is by far the hardest part, so just kind of do as you see here if you are following along at home. You need to press one arm of the lever assembly through your carrier and then interface the rear of the lever assembly with that block. And then you sort of need to finagle the action into the correct position to get the front of this lever assembly to line up with that pinhole. Once that's lined up, you can go ahead and push this pin straight through the action, and that'll hold the front of the lever assembly in place. Go ahead and press home the rear of your lever assembly, and then replace that little set screw in the bottom that holds that front pin in place. And finally, the front of that lever assembly should line up with this pinhole in the front. Go ahead and give it the very technical whack with a hammer, and then once that sits flush, you can go ahead and press it the rest of the way through and replace the set screw on the outside. And now, as you can see, we have a fully functioning and beautiful sounding lever action receiver, all finished up and ready to replace the stock. The stock is just as easy as before, only this rear screw on most Model 94s is actually going to be the thing that holds the stock to the tang, and that wood grain is looking very, very good. And here is the finished product. The 1915 Model 94. Still worn, still looks its age, still imperfect, still holds on to all of its memories. The whole thing is still solid, runs reliably, and now is protected from the damage that time would have continued to do to it had it been left the way that it was. I love the color shift moving through the walnut of the stock through here. There's still quite a bit of color shift to the receiver, the lever assembly, the magazine tube, and the barrel itself, which I think is a really cool look. Again, I didn't want this thing looking brand new. I wanted to preserve the way that it looks on its 110th birthday, but just make sure that it was going to survive longer without falling victim to any heavy corrosion or things like that. Now, like I said, in the next video, we're going to be taking this rifle and the 1949 production model out onto the range to assess performance. And if all goes well in part 2, we will take them out with us on a November rifle hunt in the Appalachian foothills of West Virginia, which I am personally super excited for. So thank you guys for watching. As always, remember to stick around because this story is just getting started.